Morning, citizens. It's Sunday the 23rd of October, so it's the this autumn equinox. And it is some months, as you know, since I've released anything else, and there are a variety of reasons why that is. Some of them mundane and some of them more significant. One of the more significant is that I wasn't really quite sure what else to say. Still not really quite sure what to say today, but you know, what with all that's been happening in Westminster and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak and all the rest of it, not that I'm going to be able to do anything about it, obviously, but it was. I watched a little post by Robert Kennedy Jr. and it was quite inspirational, really. And he was saying that in his world, where he does battle with pharmaceutical companies and large corporations all the time, it's fought with failures and disappointments all the time, and tragedies, and people that he represents die, and die in horrible fashion. But he says you have to keep turning up. You have to keep turning up, and you have to keep, every morning you have to report for duty. And I haven't been reporting for duty for, maybe 4 or 5 months, 6 months maybe. And like I say, there's many reasons behind that, but not least of the reasons is sort of lack of engagement, lack of support. I don't mean, that I'm personally aggrieved at a personal lack of support from anybody, but my reach goes down all the time, and I now get less than 500 views a video, which I shouldn't be doing it for the views, but I was thinking that there are other things that perhaps I could do which might be more useful with my time. I haven't done them because of a combination of disillusionment and disenchantment and laziness and lack of belief, I suppose. But I've tried to get involved with this group, UK Citizen. It used to be called UK Citizen 2021. It's now called UK Citizen, which is a bit confusing because of my own moniker of Citizen X. But they are a grassroots type of organisation, and they are nationwide, and it's something. It's something. And then there's another guy, a young guy called Matt Gubber, I think his name is, and he also has been someone who felt he couldn't stay silent any longer, and is worried about the World Economic Forum and the loss of all our freedoms, and he's started this thing called the International Liberty Forum, and he's trying to build a resistance to what's happening as well. So he's someone worth having a look at as well. And one of the things that is, I suppose, positive in a way, is that what with all the installation of a globalist Remainer World Economic Forum government being installed in the UK above our heads, which we're getting quite used to that, obviously. There have been noises by the smaller parties, which I haven't heard before, about getting together. You know, Nigel Farage's Reform, Reclaim, the Heritage Party, UKIP, you know, the Freedom Alliance, who've been trying to build an alliance for some time, in the face of apathy and intransigence. And, you know, I've actually been in contact with them, and, you know, for instance, one of the things they said that was they were trying to build an alliance with, just to name one example, was Lawrence Fox, and whenever they try to arrange a meeting, he's always got something else to do, and so nothing ever gets off the ground. But maybe what's happening now is that there may be a new impetus for this now, which can only be a good thing. You know, it's possible that the Conservative Party, you know, may immolate itself. I mean, we can always hope. There's never been a greater chance of that, and some of you may feel, well, that's just terrible because it means the Labour Party will get in. But the thing is, it doesn't really matter if it's the Conservatives or the Labour Party. You know, they're no different in essence. They're no different. They're all globalists. They're all Remainers. They're all tainted and captured by the World Economic Forum. So if the Conservative Party destroys itself, then that's one down, one to go. You know, we have, you know, and it wouldn't take much for the Labour Party to destroy itself either. You know, they're even more useless than the Conservatives, if that's, you know, seemingly they've managed that seemingly impossible task. So if we could, you know, get rid of the two major parties, you know, or wound them so badly that they can't get elected, I mean, that's got to be a good thing, surely. And that, you know, normal people with their normal concerns might get a hearing. So there is a little bit of cause for optimism in that. I mean, the spectre of Boris Johnson coming back to try and get his old job back as Conservatives, I mean, that is quite hilarious. If they tried to get Sunak in twice and failed twice, I mean, that's hilarious. I mean, that really is, for comedy value, that's worth having. But we have to remember that who Johnson is, and Johnson was Prime Minister when all this shit came down. You know, it's possible that the reason he was got rid of was because he decided to go off the reservation and wouldn't do what he was told anymore. That's possible. But he did what he was told for some time. And he did the lockdowns, and they tried to do the forced vaccinations. You know, Mrs. X came within an ace of losing her job. Within 3 days it was. And she called him out on it. I'm so proud of her, you know. So she didn't go on any marches, she didn't release any videos, she just firmly and completely refused to take the vaccine. You know, and that's, if everyone had done that, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. But she called their bluff, and they backed off. But it was Johnson who did that. You know, he was the man in charge at the time. And of course now we've got Hunt. who, as far as I can tell, is nothing more than a Chinese spy. That's all I can, that's my view of it. And I do feel that we are at this point now where we're in a proper race. A race is that on the one hand they have to get their control and surveillance infrastructure completely in place, 100%, before enough people wake up. And it is a race. It's a race, and I've shirked my responsibilities to that because I became disillusioned, and I was trying to explore other options of things that I can do, more things that I can do. I mean, in my local town, I haven't done it religiously, but I go and set up my stall in the centre of this town, and I did it through the summer with my table of all information, and I tried to talk to as many people as I could, and it wasn't very successful, it wasn't very much, but it was something. And I haven't done it for some weeks now, and I should perhaps get back to it, but I did feel, I think part of the reason that I've become slightly depressed about things is because I'm not in the game. I haven't been in the game. I haven't been in the fray. I left the battlefield, if you will, went AWOL. So, I did feel better, even with my puny efforts, and I still feel, I still feel quite good about the things that I've done, because I've got something I can point to, which at least says, well, I resisted all this shit, hopefully it won't all get memory hold. And I'm keeping my receipts anyway, so hopefully it won't disappear forever. But I was speaking to one of my oldest friends the other night, and he's, I've talked to you about him before, and he's one of my oldest friends, and he's, I've known him for over 40 years, but he is diametrically opposed to me on all of this stuff. He's respectful of my opinions, about surveillance and about Brexit. He agrees with me about surveillance and stuff, but broadly, but not enough to do anything about it. But he's absolutely spitting tacks over Brexit, and of course, if Johnson gets in, he's gonna go over the deep end. And he brings everything back to Trump. His Trump derangement syndrome makes Sam Harris's look like a minor irritation. You talk to him about it, he can't. It's just below the surface all the time. He seems like he's going to lose his temper about it. You can't talk to him about it, and I don't like Trump either. I think he's an odious character, but I do feel that Biden is a dictator they all warned that Trump would be. He just doesn't say the same outrageous things, that's all. But now, of course, he's talking about the Truss Kwarteng mini budget, which everybody's been blaming as sent the economy over the edge, and I don't know enough about economics to know. I'm beginning to get some understanding of what actually went on, and you know, perhaps it did seem a bit reckless. It, you know, it did seem as if it was a bit of a leap of faith in what they were trying to do. But there also seems to be that it also seems to be as if it, what the result of that almost was like it was in a playbook. You know, get them to do something stupid like this, and then cause a run on the pound, and then Jeremy Hunt, who was in Brussels that morning before he was appointed Chancellor, and he wasn't appointed Chancellor by Liz Truss, that's for fucking sure. And you only have to look at Liz Truss in the House of Commons to know that she wasn't in charge. You know, things were being imposed from elsewhere. Now, you may want to speculate on where that elsewhere is, but I think we've all got a pretty good idea of where it is, where it's coming from. And, you know, he's absolutely mired in the BBC, Financial Times, The Guardian, all of the mainstream stuff. He's absolutely mired in CNN. He watches a lot of the American mainstream channels. You know, hates Fox, hates Tucker Carlson. You know, he gets angry because he thinks that Trump's going to get away with it. You know, he believes that January the 6th was an actual insurrection. And if the protesters had got a hold of Mike Pence, they would have killed him. Now, you know, I'm not so sure of my ground on all this. So, and of course, if somebody's absolutely obsessed with something, which he is, he'll know things that I don't know. You know, but everything that he knows is stuff which is vomited out by the mainstream media. You know, he believes that the mainstream media are to be trusted. You know, he believes that the BBC is a trusted and respected organ of truth. And, you know, I just don't believe that. You know, and he said to me in the past, he said, "Oh, the trouble with the internet is it's the Wild West, isn't it? There's no regulation." You know, and you know, that was the case, of course. It's increasingly less so. But when talking to him about, you know, about Trump or Brexit, which is Brexit is only slightly less triggering to him than Trump. Yeah, and like I say, he is respectful of my point of view, and he says that I know we disagree on this, and that, you know, that I think it's all about sovereignty, you know, which I do. But, you know, he points to a study that says that Northern Ireland is doing better than the rest of the UK because it's still in the customs union, and to him that's proof that Brexit was a massive mistake. You know, and I don't know where that report comes from. I mean, I can guess where it comes from, and he reports to me that there have been, you know, studies which show that Britain has got the lowest growth forecasts of all of the G7 countries. Now, I've seen several things which point to just the opposite, that our growth rates are actually top of the G7. And I was trying to say to him that, you know, this is the trouble we have with this is that how can we establish what is true? And he says, "Oh, but these are government figures." And I'm saying, well, the figures that I see are respected government figures. You know, this Office of National Statistics or whatever it is. And, you know, I looked up the thing about the mini budget, and the main sort of criticism from the mini budget came from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And it turns out the Institute of Fiscal Studies don't have their own studies. What they do is they were quoting an analysis by Citibank in America. They didn't do their own. They're getting it secondhand from somewhere else, and that was what was all over the headlines, and that was what supposedly caused a flight of capital and a run on the pound and all the rest of it. And but when Hunt was brought in, supposedly to steady the markets, it turned out that, you know, our forecast got worse after he produced his new budget, which trashed the old mini budget, you know. And the IMF, apparently, you know, you can look this up, is the IMF's forecast of the UK's prospects are actually quite rosy, as is BNP, the enormous French bank, and there's another group, another sort of non-government agency, which also puts it. So I was just saying to him that the trouble is that we don't know what's true. You know, we don't know what's true. But he is convinced that what he knows is true, and that everything that I might come up with is just nonsense I've got from the internet. And the thing is that he's just unreachable. He's just unreachable. He just won't accept it. He won't accept that there's any doubt in the stuff that he has been fed through the mainstream media. He just won't accept it. He says, well, these are government figures. It's official figures. You know, I see official figures all the time, which contradict the things that he tells me. But, you know, of course, as always, you know, you don't go armed with a whole sheaf of references that you can shout back at them. And not that it would do any good if you did. But my point was that, and I think this is an issue more generally, and it's probably even more acute in the United States, and, you know, perhaps Canada as well. And it's a problem here, but it seems to be, from what I've seen, it seems to be even more of a problem here, is there is no common ground. There's no middle ground. The right and the left cannot agree on anything. And they cannot agree on things which 5 years ago would have been established truths. You know, now it's all a matter of opinion, and it's all a matter of what you think the motives of the other side are. And, you know, I didn't want to fall out with him, and we didn't fall out because we've been friends for 40 years and we're not going to fall out. But the things that he doesn't know are just astonishing. I mean, he'll probably think the same about me, but when I told him that 87% of all the migrants coming up on the beach are men, he goes, oh, I didn't know that. You know, he didn't know that. And I think there was a report on the BBC on the television where there was one of the migrant boats got into trouble, and they fished this woman out of the water. You know, and as some wag said, it's funny how the BBC can find the only female migrant, and yet they could never spot the children in Jimmy Savile's dressing room. You know, but this is just it. You know, he doesn't know that, and I know that Twitter isn't real life, but Twitter is often real life in 6 months' time. You know, and as a substitute for my YouTube channels, I spent too much time on Twitter. You know, I can't keep away from it. I don't watch television. I hardly watch films anymore. You know, it's like, so I guess I'm a bit addicted to it. You know, I have to say, you know, and of course, if I did something a bit more constructive, like the YouTube, then, you know, it would probably be better for me. But I don't think the stuff can be ignored. I mean, you can't pretend everything's going to be okay. I mean, you know, there are signs of optimism. I mean, I've managed to get my mother to start watching GB News, which I was quite pleased about. And so she watches that now. She said she'd given up watching the news, you know, because I have been, for, you know, a couple of years now, I've been pouring scorn over the news, and she's gradually stopped watching it. So She's not having any more boosters, for instance, and she didn't have the first booster because she developed a problem with her eye. And I don't know if it had anything to do with vaccination. I'm not suggesting that at all, but she's healthy. You know, she's only 75. She's in pretty good health. And, you know, I didn't think that she needed it. And so she decided she wasn't going to have one either. So, and strangely enough, even my sister, who was a riled headbanger for all the COVID shit, and would make sort of veiled reference, and sometimes not veiled references to me being a conspiracy theorist. Even she said, well, I'm not taking any more, it's just all nonsense now, isn't it? You know. And of course this is a problem we're going to get, and it's a problem that I knew was going to be an issue, in that in 5 years' time you won't find a single person who ever said they supported the lockdowns. You know, you won't find that. You know, in the same way that, you know, in the same way that probably in the 1830s and 1840s, you'll probably, you know, once slavery had been abolished, you'll probably find you'll probably would have trouble ever saying anybody was ever in support of slavery. But, you know, back in 1800 or 1780, 1790, there was no opposition to slavery, you know, and it's one of those ridiculous things that people think that had they been alive then they would have bravely fought against slavery. No, they wouldn't have done, because people didn't. Because people were sheep as much as they are now. You know, that's the point of recording history, because it allows us to say, fucking hell, look what we used to allow. We used to allow human beings to own other human beings and to chain them up and make them work for fuck all. You know, and it seems incredible that people used to do that. And yet we know that they did. But to deny or to sort of assert without any evidence that you would have been one of the brave ones is just ridiculous. You know, you almost certainly wouldn't have been. You know, so and it is going to be difficult in the years to come when people say, "Oh well, I never supported it." You know, well, if you didn't actually actively do concrete things to oppose it, it means you supported it. And you know, that is going to call people out on that is going to be quite difficult in itself. Because, you know, I never expected to be this vindicated about so many things. You know, I was always on shaky ground, and I always felt I was on shaky ground with discussing the efficacy of the vaccine or whether it was safe or whatever it was, and because I didn't know it. I don't know about anything about vaccines or viruses or anything. I've no idea whatsoever. So I've always tried to argue about things on a point of principle. You know, I didn't really get too much into the, you know, how effective is the vaccine. You know, I mean, I retweet things from people who seem to know what they're talking about, questioning the accuracy of the vaccines, but it's not something I do myself because, you know, I don't know. But I think sometimes it's quite reasonable to respond to a whole ton of circumstantial evidence without actually knowing the intricacies of you know, spike proteins and all that sort of stuff. So I've always tried to argue on a point of view of principle. One of the most depressing things about the whole thing was how quickly everybody just abandoned their principles. You know, the sad truth is probably that most people don't have principles. They don't have any principles at all. You know, they only have interests. And of course, if the whole world is going nuts for, vaccine passports and you can't do this and you can't do this because you've got to have a vaccine, then most people will just cave. They won't even think of it as caving. They'll just go, oh, that's what the television told me to do, so I better do it. You know, and you know, thank God for the people who, you know, stuck to their principles. You know, because they're all being vindicated. And people just didn't think, just, you know, just 20 yards down the road that you just, you know, you abandon your inalienable rights at the first sign of resistance. You know, it's just, the whole point of inalienable rights is they're supposed to be inalienable. You're not supposed to have to abandon them for any reason, even a serious reason. You know, even if we had Ebola sweeping across the world, you know, the principle should still hold. It's more difficult to maintain the principle under those sort of extreme conditions, but this was nothing like extreme. You know, there's more studies coming out now suggesting that the virus, it was even less virulent than we thought, and we thought it was, you know, had a 99.7% infection fatality rate, and that's for people who got it. But of course, the other really, really depressing thing about this is that, you know, rights and bills of rights and rights enshrined in law and constitutions and charters of rights and freedoms and all this stuff, they don't mean anything if they're not defended. I mean, one of the sort of great things about the US Bill of Rights, of course, is the fact that the, you know, enshrined in the Second Amendment is that, you know, people are allowed to, you know, and the way it's framed is so awkward, depending on your point of view, or so brilliant, depending on the other point of view, is that the rights shall not be infringed. And that's quite brilliant, that, really, because it means that any gun control is unconstitutional. Now, I don't know what the latest in America is and whether, I mean, but there is, the United States government has no respect, like other governments, has no respect at all for its own constitution. It's all about power. Right, we're in power and we can make this happen. You know, don't give me some 250-year-old document. You know, I don't want to read that. You know, we've got to make these people do what we tell them to do. You know, that's what it is. It's might is right, and that's the great thing about the Second Amendment is the way that it's phrased, because it does give Americans the right to say, I don't care what else you say, I don't care what arguments come up with, how many times you tell me it's for the greater goods, you're not allowed to tell me that I can't have a gun. You're not allowed to. You know, and it does seem to be holding. I don't know what the details are, because I've seen some things where, you know, people have complained about certain Republican members who've caved in on the gun control issue. So I don't know. I don't know what the latest position is. But if the Americans hadn't had that, you know, we'd be living in a very different world. And because, you know, we tend to sort of, you know, the American experience goes out beyond its own borders. You know, I mean, it doesn't go out beyond its own borders enough. I mean, we don't have any guns. You know, the Canadians are getting, you know, they've just, you know, had a ban on handguns, haven't they? And, you know, just like us and the Australians and New Zealanders, just to highlight the 5 countries in the so-called Five Eyes group, the sort of Anglosphere, the rich Anglosphere, only one of those countries still has guns. You know, 1.5, I suppose, if you can count Canada, I guess. You know, and that's, you know, I don't know if it's an accident or whatever it is, and I'm sure that some of the people who push gun control are doing it for what they consider to be the best reasons. But you know, I think the only reason that the United States isn't a total dictatorship now is because of that. You know, it's not because of the Constitution. It's not because of the First Amendment or the Fourth or any of the other important ones, you know, which are the important ones. It's only because of that one. And it's a protection that we don't have here. And the Australians had that protection until, what was it, 1990? And the New Zealanders had it until 2019. Just before the pandemic, surprisingly enough. You know, so... Now, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a ramble and a bit of a rant, and as you can tell, I haven't written anything down. I'm not following my own script here, but I thought it was a way to sort of get back into it and try and do something again. You know, to get back into the fray. And I remember reading that I think it was David Stirling, who was the Scotsman who started the SAS in the Second World War, and I think he was in Cairo or somewhere, and he was bemoaning the fact that, you know, there were an awful lot of people who were keen to take the fight to the Germans, but he said there was an awful lot of people who were quite content to remain outside of the fray and not join the battle. And that's what we have here. You know, we have an awful lot of people who know that what is going on is wrong. They know it's wrong. You know, you can tell that they know it's wrong because they keep quiet when they really ought to not keep quiet. You can tell, and you can tell by the number of people who don't want to talk about this stuff anymore. They think it's over. I was like, you know, we don't want to talk about that anymore. You know, they don't want to talk about it because they were wrong. And they feel guilty. They were wrong, and they feel guilty because they didn't stand up. They didn't stand up, and they don't want to talk about it because they know they were cowards. That's why they don't want to talk about it. Not only were they cowards, but they were also wrong. And events have proved them wrong. And of course, most of them don't spend time on the internet like we all do. So they shut their ears to it, and they just watch the television news, and they nod sagely when a new report suggests that, oh, maybe lockdowns weren't such a good idea after all, and they think, oh yes, well, maybe they weren't such a good idea. I'm glad somebody's you know, being sensible about this, and you know, maybe that's a good thing. But they're not looking at their own behaviour, about how none of this shit would have happened if they'd only just been a bit braver. And I'm not saying be very brave, not brave at all, really, just not completely cowardly. That's the problem. People have been utterly cowardly. You know, they've also been stupid, but you can excuse people for being stupid. I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, I've been stupid about all sorts of things, you know, in my own life. You know, done things that I knew I shouldn't have done, or not done things that I knew that I should have done and not done them. So, you know, I'm stupid, you know, and my life isn't very easy now, and my old age will be very difficult because of the things that I haven't done, you know. And it's just, but it is a source of great shame to me that I've not done the right things. But that just concerns me. You know, my life may be difficult because of the mistakes that I've made. But I may well be living in an open prison camp because of the cowardice of others. And that's not okay. And I won't forgive those people who did. You know, I may never, I may never get into full-blown arguments with people and about stuff. I may not, and they may never feel the force of my ire. But in a way, I will despise them. You know, even if silently I'm doing it. You know, and I want to think about people who will not acknowledge that myocarditis is now a real thing in the lives of children and adults, boys and men primarily. What am I to think about? And as we may begin to see, and it seems likely that this may happen, is that the menstrual issues of teenage girls and young women seem to be affected. And what does affected mean? Affected means it's not the same as it should be. And what should be is that, you know, teenage girls and you know, late teenage girls and young women should be able to get pregnant and have healthy babies. Affected means that may not happen. And it may not happen because of the medical procedure that they had been subjected to. In the same way that people who stood by and allowed their teenage girls to have their breasts removed because they thought they were boys. What am I to think of those people? I mean, is there a moral equivalence between those policemen and social workers and local councillors in South Yorkshire did nothing when they knew that thousands upon thousands of teenage girls were being gang raped by scores of adult men? What am I to think about that? I suppose this is the, you know, and this is the really horrific thing about this. I suppose that at least those social workers and local politicians and policemen didn't allow it to happen to their own children. I mean, it's pretty disgusting what they allowed to happen to other people's children. And even more disgusting, the reasons why. Because they thought they were all slags and prostitutes and whores. Even though they were only 12 years old. You know, what am I to think of people like this? But nevertheless, perhaps we shouldn't just focus on our anger about things. We should keep the anger in reserve, and you know, and the anger is a necessary thing to harness for the future. You know. it has a use. And yeah, and stewing in your own anger and doing nothing about it is not good for your mental health at all. We do have to have a purpose. And in a way, this is the fight of our lifetime. This is, in a way, what we are. The reason we're here now on this earth and fighting this is perhaps it's predestined. Perhaps this was always meant to be our fight. And it's a difficult fight because, I often feel, in a way, kind of sort of envious of the wartime generation. They had a proper enemy. They had a proper enemy, and everybody, pulled in the same direction, and it was an enemy worth fighting, and they came out victorious, and and I think that they will be forever magnificent for that. But there's also, I'm also thinking that in that respect, their struggle was easier than ours, because if we fight against this, we get called anti-vaxxers and selfish and granny killers and all of this stuff, and then there's all the other thing that's all of this seems to be connected. COVID went off the headlines like that when Ukraine happened, and it was like instant. It was instant. One day we were everyone was talking about COVID, and it was just this terrible pandemic, and the entire news cycle was dominated by it, and then immediately it was Ukraine, and now we've got this sort of proxy, unwinnable, possibly unending war that's going on, and could result in Armageddon, nuclear Armageddon, in the old-fashioned way that we always used to know it. We managed to get through 40 years of Cold War without mutually assured destruction, and now we've got all these warmongers just pushing this war. And of course, if you question it, you're a Putin apologist. And then of course it'll be, and that'll turn into, you're just being treacherous. Putin's the enemy. For all I know, Putin could be in on it. You can't trust anything now. You certainly can't trust the narrative on the Ukraine any more than you can trust the narrative on COVID. And and as much as I have admiration for the wartime generation, there is a small part of me is thinking that maybe the Second World War was all a bit of a manipulation. I don't really want to think that. I really don't want to think that. But it does make you wonder whether, if we think that the majority of population has been manipulated into supporting Ukraine, maybe they were manipulated into having the war in against Germany. And it gives me a horrific possibility, which I don't want to believe, this possibility that had I been around there, I might have been a conscientious objector. And I don't like that at all. I want to believe that the Second World War was a noble war, fought for the best reasons, and I do genuinely still think that. But, like everything else, there's a doubt in my mind about everything. And that's why that conversation I had with my friend was so difficult, because all I was saying was that, you know, can we have a conversation about where all our information comes from? I mean, I know I get a biased, a skewed version of things, but I know he does as well. And I know that the majority of the population is, the majority of the population is fed that as well. And the things that I'm beginning to believe now, which I never thought I would believe, it seems to be that if a conspiracy theory doesn't disappear after a week, for instance, if it doesn't disappear, a slightly weird example of this is the monkeypox. The monkeypox, they declared a world health emergency over monkeypox, and it just disappeared. It just didn't take. So that kind of tells me there was nothing to it. But every other conspiracy, if it doesn't disappear immediately, does seem to be, eventually, it does actually turn out to be true. The lab leak, the efficacy of the vaccines. One of the things I didn't believe at all, was I just thought was lunatic stuff, was, the chemtrails, and then I'm beginning to think, well, maybe there's something in that as well. I mean, solar radiation management is a thing. It is a thing. Cloud seeding is a thing. If that's a thing, then what else is a thing? I've only got so much bandwidth to think about all these sorts of things. I mean, there are people who encourage me to believe in the Jewish conspiracy, and that in some people's eyes, globalist is interchangeable for Jewish or Zionist. I don't know enough about it, and I'm not, I'm not particularly interested in investing much of my time in that, because of the possible horrible outcomes of it. But I'm prepared to believe almost anything now. But we do have to do, there are things that we have to do, concrete things that we have to do, and there are things coalescing in my mind in what needs to be done. And I've got some ideas over things that need to be done, and and they're not very sophisticated either, but with all this, all this surveillance, which has been going on for decades now, this surveillance grid which is being put in place everywhere. I mean, the amount of automatic number plate cameras I've seen since the beginning of the so-called pandemic, there's lots more of them, a lot more of them, in places where they certainly don't seem to be justified, except that they are now on quite a lot of significant interchanges, so that anybody going this way, anybody going that way, will be captured by the surveillance cameras. And then there's also the the clampdown on information on the internet, the online harms bill, and the other people in the world, like that stupid horse-faced woman in New Zealand talking about it's misinformation, disinformation is something we can't ignore. And the people at the World Economic Forum saying that we have to recalibrate what we mean by freedom of speech. Recalibrate, that's an absolute freedom of speech. It's absolute. But so any attempt to calibrate it means you'll get less. You won't get more. because it's already at, supposedly already at 100%. I mean, it obviously isn't for all sorts of reasons, but you know, in a sort of mechanistic way, it is at 100%. Anyway, any attempt to recalibrate it will be less than 100%. In the same way that young women's menstrual cycles may be affected. You know, affected means they'll have more trouble in conceiving children. And this thing with Johnson coming back, you know, if he does get the leadership again, you know, I'll be less than over the moon. But you know, I will enjoy the meltdown of the Remainers. That twice they've tried to get their man in, and twice they failed. Although, having said that, it does seem as if, as of this morning, Sunak has gained some. So, you know, we may be back in the European Union. You know, they didn't like that. They fucking didn't like that democracy, did they? You know, it's like with Brexit, we voted the wrong way. And then when Johnson got in, we voted for the wrong person then, and then they got so they put, you know, well, after Cameron they put May in. They put their person in, got May in, and then people didn't like that, so they voted for Johnson. And then they got Johnson, and that was again the wrong way to vote. So they tried to install Sunak, and then they got Truss. So they had to get her out in order to get Sunak in again. And Hunt. But I suppose we are going to have to welcome those people in who've changed their mind. We have to welcome them in. I mean, an apology would be nice, you know. But that can come later, I guess. The main thing is we get more people on our side. But this is the trouble about these, trying to find some common ground with people. I mean, and like I say, in America it seems particularly acute, and that's been brewing for a long time. You know, when was it Americans started identifying themselves as Republican or Democrat? When did they stop identifying themselves as Americans? You know, I'd be interested to know what you think, you know, because I'm sure it wasn't always the case. I'm sure it wasn't always the case like that, but, you know, not being American, I don't know. So I'm sorry this isn't any more inspirational or doesn't add enough grist to our particular meal. But we have to show up. We have to report for duty every day. As Robert Kennedy says, we've just got to show up. You know, and he says, this is one of the things he says, which was quite inspirational. He says, nobody goes from our side to their side. Yeah. They all come from their side to our side. So, in that respect, we do get stronger with every day. But it is a race. Anyway. Better leave it at that. So, see you next time.